Hello, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what it takes to put together an arcade box. Sometimes these are called a main box or an arcade box or game box. So I made mine about 3 years ago with my son as kind of a home project. It's a great thing to do if you want to learn about computers and electronics and how to put things together. It's one half carpentry and the other half electronics, so it's an interesting mix. The one we put together was fairly simple. Not a lot of, no soldering required, a bit of basic carpentry, and a little bit of an understanding about how PCs work. So we started with some particle board, an old square Dell monitor. Those monitors are getting harder and harder to find these days. We found ours in an old thrift store. Originally we wanted to use a CRT monitor, like an old style TV, just to kind of recapture that feeling of the 1980s, but they're increasingly hard to find and actually quite heavy. They would have made the box, which is already very heavy, almost too heavy to carry. So we did resort to one of like an older style LCD monitor. That wasn't the only reason why we chose an LCD monitor. The other reason was being able to handle a variety of resolutions. For a lot of the older raster style games, do quite well on a TV type monitor. But when you get to things like the vector style games, when you think about like an asteroids that use a technology that's similar to an oscilloscope and actually draws the lines across the screen, you want a very crisp, high resolution image for that, something at least about 1024 by 768, which is what we have here. So we bought an old PC, an old Core 2 Duo at an auction to use for this project. It was probably around $100. It had a standard graphics card in it. Was able to do 3D, so that was an important part of it because we are using DirectX for some of these emulators, not for the main, but for some of the other newer emulators. We use DirectX to do the 3D engine for this. So it's an old Dell monitor, an old Dell PC as well. Like as I said, a Core 2 Duo. Had standard memory, nothing really flash. It ran about $100. So we did a little bit of dissecting of that. So it had a USB daughter board, which we actually took off and placed on the side, which allowed us to plug in just some standard Xbox USB controllers. So that's useful for some of the other emulators we have, because we have a variety of emulators that we place onto the platform. I'll say a little bit about the platform itself, the master of all the emulators. We're using Arcade Maximus, something like that. It's not necessarily in favor anymore. I know there's some other newer ones that have a lot more whiz-bang kind of things that they can do. I chose this one because it's very simple to configure. The job of the emulator platform is actually to launch all of the individual emulators and load the ROMs. And so it can work with a number of different emulators all together, but makes it kind of a seamless experience, like you're running it all on one platform. The other thing we did, we're running Windows XP, which is quite an old version of Windows. But the nice thing about it is that it supports all of the emulators quite well. Still runs DirectX, and I don't need to worry about patching it or upgrading it. It's quite a mature operating system, and it is completely air-gapped. So we don't have any networking going into this at all. So we don't need to worry about vulnerabilities or any kind of virus protection or anything like that. It's a completely air-gapped standalone system. One of the other things we did to tweak Windows XP is we removed all of the fanfare, all of the Windows XP logos that start up, to kind of just keep with that illusion that you're actually starting a standalone arcade box instead of a PC that's been stuffed inside it. I think if you have those Windows XP logos coming up in the beginning, it kind of ruins the illusion. I wasn't able to get rid of the BIOS logo that comes up when you first flip on the computer, but so what? You know, you can only do so much. But it does definitely block out that Windows XP logo, which is nice, and it loads directly into the emulator platform, the Maximus Arcade, and then from there you can actually pick which emulator you want to use and launch right into the game. So we have a number of emulators on here and a number of different ROMs. So we have MAME, of course. MAME is a multiple arcade machine emulator, so it can emulate lots of different platforms, but primarily it's used for arcade games, right? The kind of games that you would have seen back in the 80s, which I spent countless rolls of quarters using. So it emulates very well all of those quite old systems from the early 80s, even the late 70s, some of them, which is really great. And the other thing that I like about main is that it actually has also the cabinet art. So you can choose to either leave that on or off. I choose to leave that on, even though that it does reduce the screen playing size, just because it's a really nice thing to be able to see all that old artwork that kind of used to be on those arcade boxes. I love, almost as much as the game itself, seeing all of the instructions and the beautiful artwork, some of the beautiful 1970s and early 80s artwork that you see on some of these old arcade games. I'll talk just a little bit about the inside and how we put this together. It's a little bit embarrassing because my wiring skills are just terrible. But as I said, we did this as a project with my son, and it does work. It works. All the buttons work, so we're happy enough with that. We don't really care what it looks like on the inside. We should. Was it Steve Jobs who said that you should always care the way things look on the inside? You really used to sign all their Macintosh computers, and well, wait, we didn't do that. Anyway, so it's part of the board, and obviously we spray painted on the outside to give it a nice blue look. But on the inside, it's got that motherboard, which is as I said, the Core 2 Duo motherboard, standard hard drive, standard power supply, and you can see in there we've got a power board in there as well. And so we just plugged in the monitor and the motherboard directly into that power board, and then just took the power cord cable, and that becomes the power cord for the whole box. So it's really easy. That means you don't need to do any kind of complex electronics. It's just simple, plug it in, and it works. We also lined out the power switch from the motherboard, the little dip switches that would normally run to the power switch on the PC case, out to a little red button that I bought just from an electronics shop. It was like $1, and that was glued onto the outside of the box, and that serves as our start and our stop box. And all it does is it tells the computer to turn off or to turn on. It's really simple. Nothing to it at all. The other thing is we took there's a little USB daughter board. So that USB daughter board, we actually took that and glued that to the inside of the case as well. And that's where we plug in the Xbox controllers. And we use those primarily for the console games. So that would be Atari, Nintendo 64, the Sega Dreamcast, and that's about it. All the other ones, all the actual arcade games, I tend to use the buttons that are on the machine itself, just because it gives you more of that sort of a faithful experience. It's funny, like this is like the dream of when I was a kid, of being able to play all these games and having access to them, and I thought I would be using this all the time. And it was more about the acquisition, though, as it always is. It's once you have everything, you realize it's not really what you wanted in the first place. What I really wanted to do was sort of relive that nostalgia of that time period. And what I'll do sometimes is I'll have a glass of red wine, I'll put in some Night Ranger or something really, really daggy from the 1980s, and I'll play a bit of Moon Patrol or some elevator action. And I gotta say, it really takes me back. What's that quote from Mad Men? Nostalgia is a wound. It's an old wound. That's really what it feels like. But it was a great project. I'm glad I did it. And even though maybe I only boot this up every once a month now, maybe, I'm still glad I did it, and I love it. Oh yes, the marquee. So the marquee on top was really simple to make. So basically, it's a piece of plexiglass. Behind that is an LED light that has a Molex connector onto it. That's the main sort of power bus cable that comes out of your power supply on your PC. So anytime the PC comes on, these LED light strips come on. It's glued to the inside of the marquee with a piece of plexiglass on top. Then the artwork I actually had made, I'll put a link to that place as well. It's based on the old Defenders artwork, but it's named Hangar 18, which was the arcade that I grew up with in the early 80s where I lived. And, more nostalgia. Can't get enough nostalgia. They say like when you start to reminisce, your life has peaked. My life peaked like about 10 years ago. So anyway, that's my arcade box. I hope you enjoyed seeing how it works. If you have any questions, I don't claim to be an expert on this stuff, but I have gone through it at least once, and I can try and answer those in the comments. If you have anything else you'd like me to cover, then feel free to drop a line in the comments, and I'll answer that as well. Thanks. See you later.